Thanks a lot for having me here. And I'm joined by Mike Schober. Just as background, my name is Izzy Azeri, one of the co-founders of Mabel. I spend a lot of time with our enterprise clients, folks like Mike over at Schwab, in terms of how they increase efficiency and get better test coverage from a quality engineering perspective. I was actually amazed before diving into this call, doing some research on Schwab, that they're the third largest asset manager in the world. So congrats on that, Mike. And maybe you can just provide some background on yourself.
Well, thanks, Izzy. I'm happy to be here. I actually lead a team called Enterprise Engineering at Schwab and Schwab Technology Services. It's a horizontal organization. One of the key initiatives that we're currently leading, and it's a multi-year effort, is an effort to transform Schwab's software delivery pipeline, which includes all quality aspects as software moves from code check-in to production deployment and activation. And quality will be an automated yet gating factor across the delivery pipeline. I think that's a key thing that we're going to be automating. Teams are doing it in various fashions today, but this is intended to be an effort that will standardize, for the most part, how teams function.
That's great. Appreciate that background, Mike. And I know lots of large enterprises are initiating projects like yours that are driven, by cloud migrations or SaaS migration. Has that been an impact that for your organization at Schwab as well?
It is actually. Schwab, as a technology organization, is on a large-scale transformational journey with the target goal of moving to cloud for applications as well as SaaS-based tooling and vendor capabilities. So that's a big move for us. It's been in the works for a while, but I think there's a much bigger push now to make that change, and especially in my area. The team that I'm on has a large on-prem footprint, and we have a goal of moving out of the data center to a SaaS-based model over the next couple of years. We don't want to do it too fast because transformation can be disruption if you do it too fast, but we are on that journey right now. And that is a large part of the delivery pipeline effort that I'm on, to provide SaaS-based solutions for just about everything that we're providing to the enterprise.
That's great. And I know, integrated delivery pipelines is kind of a common buzzword these days. What does that mean specifically for Schwab? Like how do you think that'll impact?
Well, the strategy that we're working under is it's simple, but it's to provide infrastructural software capabilities to the development teams, but also have a standard set of tools that provide the capability to observe and measure the delivery pipeline in an objective way, but also to integrate and automate and do it in a standardized way. We're not foolish enough to think that we'll get 100% standardization, but get it much more standardized than we are today. And that's the journey that we're on. It's a multi-year journey. We're currently working with pilot teams at this phase of the effort.
That's great. I know oftentimes when people are redefining their pipelines, they're thinking about what stages do I integrate automated testing into those pipelines? Is that something you're considering? And also maybe to dovetail on that as well, have you thought at all about production as an area or a focus from a test automation perspective too?
Yes, absolutely. Automated testing should start at the point of code check-in and go through the full delivery pipeline into production. Some teams are doing it in different manners, but we want to enable through the delivery pipeline all teams to do it in a more consistent way. The production part is an interesting mindset change. I think teams in general get shift left, but can be challenged sometimes when you talk about shift right and testing in production. You actually need to do both to create higher quality deployments. And I've even seen organizational barriers. For example, teams think that they aren't allowed to test in production with automated tools. That's not the fact. You can, and we do. And there are actually things that can only be encountered in a production environment in an area like a company like Schwab. I like to say in the wild. But the key is to be able to fail fast and limit the blast radius of any changes to your clients. That's the key.
That's a great point in terms of failing fast. I've seen, some customers I talk to, there's the development teams and the automation teams. doing testing in their workflow up until they get to pre-prod, and then the DevOps team takes it over when it comes to production.
Right.
What I've seen happen is, as the developers start talking about this automated testing tool that they're using, they start showing it off with their DevOps folks, and the DevOps folks are like, wow, I want to try that as well, because it's so much easier, perhaps, or more kind of synonymous with what you guys are using on the development side. So I want to use it on the operation side as well. Have you seen that pull at all, going one way or another?
Yeah, we have with the ops folks, but also we've seen it. We've started to see it with the POs, product owners. Sort of the democratization of testing with low code test automation tools. That's something that when I started on this journey, I wouldn't have thought about until we started using Mabel, and I realized how simple it is for any persona to use that capability. So we actually have POs that are doing test automation in production, building out full UAT test suites and then rerunning them on current releases and then future releases. So that's been a big change too. But yes, I do think that the various personas around the production deployments are starting to share and leverage automation in production. We actually had a use case where one team was able to work to test dark in production, which is a new concept that we're starting to we have added to our use case for delivery pipeline. They actually found an issue in production, testing dark, fixed it a couple of days before their actual the day that they were turning their features on, and we're able to have a quiet release with no issues. So that's another area that we're starting to expand the type of testing that we do in production.
And I'm sure the POs and executives were happy that it was a quiet release and not a loud release when it comes to customer feedback there as well, right?
Yeah, and that's a good point. I mean, the POs, the operations teams, when they see stuff like that, they start to have more trust in deployments and trust in the team's automation when they can see it run, but also more importantly, when they can see an issue caught like that before the feature was turned on to the clients.
And how does an organization as large as Schwab, 32,000 people globally, how does an organization like that adapt to change, where now you have POs kind of participating in testing, you have developers obviously involved, you have probably very skilled automation engineers somewhere in the middle somewhere. How does that shift happen at a company as large as Schwab?
It doesn't happen overnight. I can tell you that for sure. It takes time. Any change at a company like Schwab, or that has the scale, for example, the assets that you mentioned, the scale of assets, we have to be careful when we do production deployments and be as safe as possible. So that type of change does take time. And that's part of the delivery pipeline transformation that we're working through. That's going to be the change over time. It's a multi-year effort that will basically roll out through the enterprise.
And for those of us listening, perhaps to this, and being at a similar size organization, any tactics on how you kind of democratized testing, or how to get other people involved that perhaps don't have the experience or the skill set?
Yeah. I mean, I think there's always going to be doubters. That'll never change, and it'll always evolve. So it's not, you can't go forward and say, hey, there's this target state that we're going to get to, and then that's the end state. Because as we know, for those that have been in technology for even a short while, but then others that have been in for a while, like myself, things continue to change, and you have to change with it. So that's part of our strategy, is that, yeah, we're going to do something, we're going to roll it out, but we're going to continue to take feedback and evolve over time. But to get to how do you get people to make the change? I think the simplest way is to use the tell, show, do technique. So you tell them what you're going to do, then you show them what you're going to do, and then you do it with them. And that's been the most effective way, especially when we first started working with POs around test automation. I told them what we were going to do, and they were excited, but of course they were like, yeah, right. And then we showed them, and then we got them hands-on to do it themselves.
Yeah. And
doing it themselves. So I think that's probably the most sound technique that I've seen.
That makes a lot of sense. I was on a webinar actually last week with the CRO for Atlassian, and I think he said they hired 700 people last quarter, and
oh,
they
wow.
have reorg every 18 months. And he said, the way that you're successful at Atlassian is you have to just embrace change.
Yeah.
You have to embrace what's coming at you and, get on board and be successful that way. So it feels like it's something similar at Schwab where these POs are embracing that change and the benefits that could bring them.
Absolutely. They're seeing the benefits. They're gaining the trust in the automation. There was another scenario where one of the teams that's using a low code solution was testing in production, and I was shadowing the deployment, and they ran the automation. It was Mabel. They ran the automation. The PO ran the automation in production, and then they were going to run some more automation. They said, "No, we trust what we just saw. We're good. We can move to the next phase." So just to see that level of trust in the team and in the automation that was built was pretty amazing.
So, as you're moving testing into these integrated pipelines and as you're kind of shifting left and shifting right, what have been the impacts across either the business or the team that you've seen?
We actually, there's an interesting use case that we had on my previous team when I was leading a delivery team. They traditionally, a lot of teams at Schwab do Selenium development for automation. That's just a kind of a traditional automation tool. But this one team brought forward Mabel as a low code solution and I guess they kind of did a pilot, but it was a live pilot with real testing, and compared the two testing paradigms. I'll put it that way. What they found from a benefits impact perspective is they reduced the time to create tests by 85%. And the developers, by the way, were the testers on this team. They were doing their own automation. So they were thrilled by that. And so were the POs. Another positive impact is the MTTR was reduced by 80% using a low code test automation solution. And then they were using a separate visual verification tool, and they were able to eliminate that separate integration of another tool in their tool chain. And then this was really the kicker, is the experience for the employees, product plus technology teams was improved by 104%. So that's pretty large impact on a team in terms of efficiency and engagement.
Wow. Yeah, I've never, I guess, thought about the impact on employee happiness themselves, but it sounds like also is a huge factor and, probably helps with retention, especially in these days where hiring is so difficult and we're all trying to retain, the great talent that we have. So perhaps, I guess, for the audience here, surveying the team members after they implement a low code solution or a new product and understanding how they feel about it is probably a great suggestion. Sounds like that came in good for you.
Yeah, I mean, it did. I think the experience there too is we started our journey a few years before that, focusing on Selenium automation. And in the beginning it's fine, but over time, it's a code base. So it grows like your application code base and it gets more and more complex. And that's where the trust of the POs starts to drop. So when they did this, their automation code base had grown pretty big. So I think that their engagement started to drop because they actually had to maintain that like it was like an application, and they're developers. So going to a low code solution really streamlined their testing abilities. And that's what brought up their engagement.
That's fantastic. We do have a question here from the audience, and maybe this is rolling back to that pilot project you were talking about. And the question is, when you do a project like that, do you pick one pilot team or several product pilot teams? And how do you go and share those results once you have them broadly across the organization to help others understand the impact?
Yes, you do start with one or two teams. That's the best way to do it. For the delivery pipeline effort that I'm on, we actually have 10, but we're starting to focus more on a couple because that's just too many. And then sharing it is through, depending on your communication channels. If you're on a delivery team, it's a little more challenging being on a horizontal like myself. As we have wins across this transformation, we are literally have organizational change management people and comms people on our team. So that's going to be our method. They're the experts. We aren't the experts. We're doing the delivery pipeline. We're facilitating the automation. But being a horizontal, we have that ability to leverage and tap into those types of resources and have them as part of our extended team.
Oh, that's really interesting. So these are folks that help drive the message more broadly across the organization and the impact, who are, I guess, trusted professionals in doing that, on a day-to-day basis.
That's their full-time job, organizational change management. And then we have some comms people as well. So that they're the experts. And we tell them that some of the concepts they come up with is just fascinating listening to them talk, because I wouldn't be able to do that because that's not what I specialize in. But having them on the team is fantastic.
That's really great. What a great kind of way to get the impact out there through professionals doing this. That's awesome.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, we talked about pipelines, we talked about automated testing. Outside of Mabel or other technologies when it comes to testing, what other technologies are important that you think about the future products or capabilities that are kind of top of mind?
Well, I mean, I mentioned for us that I call it the legacy automation footprint, but Selenium's a big footprint that we have here at Schwab from a testing perspective, and it's served everyone well. But over time, it does start to show cracks because, as I mentioned, it's a code base. It becomes an application over time. API testing is a very big deal for developers and testers alike, but that's an area where POs do not venture into because that's not something that they specialize in. They can do the UI testing a lot easier. The API testing is something that they haven't ventured deeply into. But API testing is another major area. Visual is a big one too, but mainly for client-facing applications. I had a scenario on my last team where, for those that have gone to a financial institution site, you have web page, and at the bottom you have all this fine print, which is like longer than the web page. Those are the terms and conditions. And in regards to visual, there was a release where we had some CMS come over, because that's who supplies the T's and C's for us. And the visual picked up a truncation in that. And that's a legal issue for Schwab. So we picked that up and we went over to our PO and we said, hey, is this what it's supposed to look like? And the PO said, how did you find that? Because nobody reads those things because you just assume that they're right. So that's another big area from an automation perspective that's starting to become more widely used. I think a big area that we're focusing on moving forward is you hear a lot about CI/CD. So that's more kind of tail end, right-hand side. We're looking more closely, and as part of delivery pipeline, we're looking into release orchestration to be able to provide our ability to seamlessly move through the delivery pipeline. So that's a big focus for us as well.
That's great. And then, are the POs involved there too, or is that a different audience? They
will be, because they'll get a view into that. Another area that we're looking into as we start looking at delivery pipeline is, you can go all the way to production, and then you find out how things are working once you're in production. What we want to be able to do, and there's some capabilities that we've been piloting, is predict the risk of a change before it goes to production. So there's some AI-based capabilities that we're looking at that will allow us to predict the risk. And also, actually, teams probably won't like this, but I think they will over time, assign a credit score to a team based on data that's in Jira and Remedy. So it models that data and then creates a risk score and a credit score so that change management can then say, yes, certain teams can go all the way to production. Other ones we need to do a little bit more work on. Others, your risk is too high. We need to figure out why before you go to production.
Very interesting.
Yeah. So that's some of the capabilities that we've been looking into with our delivery pipeline.
That's fascinating. Yeah. So it's allowing the organization really to be prepared for the potential risk of certain releases happening based on prior data or things that they can predict that potentially
yes happen. And if something is a higher risk, you can say, okay, development team, go back and let's do some more testing on this to make sure that all the bases are covered. And when you get to production, let's make sure we monitor this closely and run those tests in production as well. Yep. So you can have some heightened visibility on higher risk releases.
Yep, that makes a lot of sense. We do have another question from the audience, Mike. You talked about this, but maybe just diving one level deeper for those of us who aren't familiar with it. But what is release orchestration when it comes to Schwab?
it's basically, there's capabilities out there that can be leveraged for that, but you're orchestrating the full release from CI through testing, automation testing, through your automating release management, basically. At Schwab, we have some manual tasks around what was defined historically around definition of done. So it's automating all of those so the delivery teams don't have to do that anymore. And the tool that we're looking at specifically allows you to set your orchestration workflow and then automate that through some pretty simple interfaces. So it's really taking the manual release management out of release management and automating it.
That's great. And it sounds like the benefit there would be kind of savings from a human interaction perspective to have to do this manually versus having to rely on a system to automate.
Yes, and it's really simple. I mean, we can call out to test automation capabilities to run automation tests and gate based on that. You can automate approvals through your change management, your ITSM system for low risk teams. You can even stop a release orchestration if the change risk is too high and require additional approvals. So it does take the manual out of release management. And another thing that the auditors, we have some auditors and first and second line of defense on our team as well for risk. Today, most of those types of things are done manually. And it's up to the development team or the release managers to basically backtrack and find all that information for the auditors. Well, with the capability that we're looking at, you can just go download the audit report and give it to the auditor, and it has everything that's been done. So it simplifies things as easy as, or as complex as audit can be for those that have been audited before.
Very useful. So Mike, we talked about a lot of the kind of advanced capabilities Schwab is either doing today or planning on doing. It does seem like Schwab is ahead of the curve when it comes to kind of, new technologies and new ways of doing things, automation. Has that always been the case, or was that kind of a shift that had to happen in the organization over time? And can you just talk to what that's been like at a company? I think I read somewhere that Schwab was founded over 50 years ago, right? So there's a lot of history there. Can you talk through that kind of technology evolution over time?
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't there in the beginning or even in the early 2000s, but Schwab's always been an innovative company from the start. So I think might have been the first discount brokerage way back in the day, and it's far from that now. But even back in the early 2000s, from what I understand, there was in the tech bubble, which I was part of, but just not a part of Schwab. But Schwab was one of the first companies that was building out a website. So I think all along it's been an innovative company. I was leading intelligent portfolios before this current role, and so we were one of the first large company robo advisors, or automated investing is what it's called, on the market. We were competing with startups. So Schwab's typically been at the forefront of innovation and technology.
That's great. Well, it's been great working with you as a partner when it comes to Mabel, and obviously look forward to the relationship in the future. Is there any more Q&A? Let's see. One more question we have here. Do you see the role of QA changing as teams integrate testing further into the development pipeline?
I do. I think that traditionally in teams, some teams still do this. QA has been more of the right side of the SDLC. I think shifting left and shifting right, QA is part of all of that. So I do think that the role changes. I think QAs become more consultants to the development team. So it's a consultative role in terms of quality. So yes, I do. I think that changes over time.
Yeah. And that's actually what we've seen in other companies as well, where QA gets embedded into the development teams as opposed to sitting separate and ends up being more of a coach as opposed to solely responsible for quality within an organization.
Yes, exactly.
Great. Well, Mike, it's been great having you on. Really appreciate you being here and sharing more about what you're doing at Schwab from a test and integrating testing earlier in development, and look forward to seeing you next time.
Sounds great. My pleasure. Thanks, Izzy.